Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of those family stories that you'll probably feel deep in your chest, the kind that makes you question how people you share a dinner table with can also be the ones who make you feel like a stranger in your own house. You probably won't survive this story without muttering "no way" at least once. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to watch the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Maybe you're in your living room right now, maybe in your car parked outside work, or maybe lying in bed with your phone dimmed down low. Wherever you are, this story is about how laughter can be crueler than words. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's comfortably embark on tonight's journey. It started with a fall, nothing cinematic, no dramatic thunder or slow motion crash, just a small, humiliating stumble. We were at my son's new house for a family dinner. The floor was polished so bright I could almost see my own reflection before my heel slipped. My arms flailed, the glass of wine flew, and I went down hard on my knee. The pain came second. The first thing that hit me was her laugh. My daughter-in-law, standing by the kitchen island holding a tray of appetizers, let out a short, sharp laugh. Not the kind of nervous chuckle people give when they're startled, but a full amused burst as if my fall were the punchline of a long, private joke. The room froze for a second. My son jumped forward to help me, murmuring, "Mom, are you okay?" But she was still smiling. I remember thinking she's beautiful when she laughs, but beauty can hide something venomous. That night, her laugh echoed in my head louder than my knee's dull ache. People always talk about how family gatherings bring everyone closer, but sometimes they reveal distances you didn't know existed. Sociologists say laughter is a bonding mechanism. It signals belonging. That night, I realized her laughter didn't include me. It marked the boundary line between us and her. Later, I sat at the dinner table pretending everything was fine. She apologized once half-heartedly, saying, "I'm so sorry, I just didn't expect it." It was like a movie fall. I smiled, because that's what mothers do when they sense their sons are watching. I told her, no harm done though. Inside, something cracked a little. It wasn't the fall itself, it was what it revealed: amusement where empathy should have been. People still debate whether humor is cruelty dressed as charm or simply a mirror that reflects how we truly feel about others. I used to think laughter was medicine. That night, it felt more like poison. As the evening went on, I noticed the subtle shifts in tone. She called me ma'am instead of mom. She corrected how I set the table, said forks go on the left in modern etiquette, as if I just crawled out of a 1950s magazine. When my son tried to lighten the mood, she rolled her eyes just slightly, the way young wives do when they feel smarter than everyone else. There's an anthropology study I once read about how in some cultures, daughters-in-law assert dominance not through confrontation, but through humor and correction. Little things that erode hierarchy without open war. I saw that study come to life that night right across the dinner table. The food was good. She's an excellent cook. I'll give her that. Every dish had a flair, the kind that looks like a cooking show segment. But as I chewed, I couldn't help feeling like I was being tested. Will I compliment her loudly enough? Will I finish my plate? Will I play my part in her perfect evening? My son, bless him, kept trying to connect us. "Mom, tell her about your garden," he said. She smiled and replied, "Oh yes, the one with the old-fashioned flowers, right?" I said. "Yes, the same ones your husband used to play around as a boy." She looked at him, smiled softly and said, "Well, he's not a boy anymore." I caught the subtext. She was staking her claim. It wasn't malicious, just territorial. Like watching two cats share a narrow fence. After dinner, when I helped clear the plates, she told me I didn't need to. "You're our guest," she said, but the word guest stung. Guests don't fold laundry when they visit. Guests don't raise the man who bought this house. Still, I complied. I moved quietly, stacking plates like I used to in my own kitchen before she came into the picture. My knee throbbed from the fall, and she noticed it. "You should really be careful on these floors." She said they're expensive wood. I wondered if she realized the irony worrying about the floor, not the person bleeding on it. That night, I lay in bed replaying that laugh. You know how sometimes you think of a sound again and again until it becomes detached from meaning? That's what happened. It became this strange symbol, a kind of warning bell. In family psychology, they say humiliation can be a form of social control. The one who laughs first controls the story. Maybe that's why it hurt so much. It wasn't just a fall, it was her claiming the narrative. The next morning, I woke up earlier than everyone else. Old habits die hard. I made coffee and stood by the window watching the first light touch their new garden. The house was modern, sleek, the kind where silence feels designed. She came down eventually in her robe hair tied up, looking effortlessly polished. "Morning," she said, grabbing her almond milk. No apology, no mention of last night, just business as usual. I wondered if she even remembered laughing. Sometimes people erase their cruelty faster than you can process it. I tried to bridge the silence, asked her about her work, her mother, her hobbies. She gave short answers, polite but closed. When my son joined us, she instantly brightened like a switch flipped. I sipped my coffee and pretended not to notice. Later, as I left, she hugged me lightly, barely touching, and said, "Hope your knee's okay." I smiled and said, "Oh, I'm tougher than I look." She laughed again, softer this time, but still with that undertone of superiority. Driving home, I thought about all the stories I'd heard from friends, mothers who lost their sons to marriage, who became side characters in their own families. I used to think they were exaggerating, but sitting there in traffic, I understood it wasn't about jealousy or control. It was about being replaced in silence, one small laugh at a time. The funny thing, a week later, she sent me a text saying, "Hope you're okay after the tumble." That emoji felt like a second shove. I replied with a simple, "Doing great, thank you." No punctuation, no warmth, just a digital handshake across emotional distance. Looking back, maybe it started even before the fall. The small glances, the invisible hierarchy, the quiet competition for my son's attention. But that night made it visible. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. People think families fall apart in explosions, but sometimes it's just one careless laugh that opens a lifelong crack. The morning after that dinner became a kind of metaphor for our entire relationship. Silent, functional, polite to the point of frostbite. Breakfast in that house always felt like walking on eggshells that had already cracked. You move slowly, pretending not to notice the mess beneath your feet. My son scrolled through his phone trying to keep peace by avoiding eye contact, while my daughter-in-law, made toast as if each slice was part of a performance. The butter perfectly even, the fruit bowl arranged by color. Even her silence had rhythm, the kind that says, "This is my space, and you're lucky to be in it." I've read somewhere that in modern blended families, silence is not the absence of love, it's the negotiation of power. Every quiet breakfast felt like a treaty being rewritten. The first day after the fall, she asked if my knee still hurt, her tone light, but her eyes sharp, scanning for weakness. I said, "It's fine though, I could barely bend it." She smiled like she'd won a small bet. I realized she didn't want me injured. She wanted me indebted to her sympathy, her home, her schedule. That's the thing about certain people, they don't destroy you outright. They make you thank them while you sink. My son was no fool. He saw the tension even if he pretended not to. "We're all just adjusting," he said once, trying to sound neutral. "You and her are both strong personalities." I laughed an old brittle sound and told him, "Strong women don't need to compete unless one of them feels unsafe." He didn't reply, but I saw something flicker in his eyes, guilt maybe, or exhaustion. I could tell he loved us both, but love is a bridge that can't hold two storms at once. That week, I stayed a few extra days to help around the house, though I think both of us knew it was an excuse to observe. I folded laundry she'd already folded, rearranged shelves she'd already organized as if claiming small pockets of relevance in her perfect home. I noticed how she always corrected my ways, where I put the towels, how I brewed the tea. "Oh, we don't use those cups," she said once, gently moving my hand away from a set of porcelain. "They're for guests." I bit my tongue. I wanted to tell her I was here before your guests ever existed, but I didn't. You learn that in family politics, words are landmines. There's an odd fact about human relationships. I once read in a psychology magazine, people remember insults 5 times longer than they remember compliments. Maybe that's why I still recall every sideways glance, every half smile she gave me that week. Like when she corrected my grammar in front of her friends at brunch, or when she mentioned casually that some older people can't keep up with technology. I laughed along, pretending to find it funny, even though I knew she was measuring my reactions. By the third morning, I stopped sitting at the kitchen island. Instead, I took my coffee outside under the shade of her meticulously pruned trees. The air smelled like wet soil and resentment. She joined me once wearing sunglasses, though it was cloudy. I didn't mean to laugh. She said, her voice soft but rehearsed. I looked at her and said, I know. She nodded, and for a brief second I thought we might bridge the distance. Then she added, it reminded me of my grandmother. She used to fall a lot too. The way she said used to make me realize the conversation was over. That night I couldn't sleep. The refrigerator hummed like a low secret. From my guest room I could hear faint laughter from their bedroom. Not cruel, just intimate, the kind of laughter couples share when they're building something new. It used to be a comforting sound when I lived with them years ago. Now it felt like I was outside the circle listening to warmth I no longer belonged to. People still debate whether parents ever truly let go of their children or if they just learn to live beside the ghosts of who they used to be. I think it's both. The next day, something strange happened. I found a note on the counter, gone to yoga. Breakfast in the fridge. It was polite, considerate, maybe even kind, but it felt like a hotel message. The fridge held a smoothie labeled for you, bright pink with a metal straw. I smiled despite myself. For a moment, I thought maybe she was trying. I drank it, and it tasted like apology, sweet, cold, impersonal. I texted her, "Thank you, it's good." She replied instantly, "Glad you liked it, just trying to keep you healthy." That emoji again. Always the emoji, a tiny shield against real emotion. Later, while she was out, I peeked at the family photo wall she'd curated. My son at graduation, their honeymoon, her mother at their wedding. No photo of me, not one. I had to laugh quietly, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. Families today are like curated social media feeds, everyone included except the people who remind you where you came from. When she got home, she caught me looking. "Oh," she said, "I meant to add more pictures, I just haven't had time." She smiled too quickly. I said, "Of course you've been busy." And that was that. We both knew the truth, but neither of us said it. That's the rule in families like ours. Honesty only exists in theory. That night at dinner, she announced she was organizing a charity event. My son beamed proud of her. "Mom, isn't that amazing?" he asked. I said, "Yes, giving back is wonderful," though inside I thought, some people donate to charity the same way they donate kindness only when someone's watching. Still, I smiled. I always smile. That's what older women do in families. They become the quiet weather system, unpredictable but necessary. I've learned that politeness can be its own form of rebellion. When someone expects you to break, staying calm is power. Sociologists call it emotional labor. I call it survival. One morning before I left, she made pancakes. "Your favorite right?" she asked, flipping them with perfect precision. I nodded, though mine were never this symmetrical. "You're really thoughtful," I said. She laughed lightly. "Well, your family." But it was the kind of family people say to strangers at weddings. When I finally packed my bag, my son hugged me tight. "Mom, thank you for visiting," he said. She added, "Come back anytime." I smiled and said, "Of course." But as I stepped outside, I knew I wouldn't return for a while. The silence followed me home like a polite ghost. It sat beside me in the car, in the kitchen, even in my garden. Sometimes silence doesn't end when you leave the house, it just changes its address. A week after I returned home, a package arrived at my door, neatly wrapped with a silver bow and a small white tag that said, "Just because." It was from her, my daughter-in-law, the queen of politeness, the woman whose laughter had etched itself into the back of my skull. Inside the box was a small porcelain figurine, a woman kneeling, holding a watering can over a blooming flower. A note lay underneath, thought. This reminded me of you always nurturing things. I held it for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or cry. It was beautiful, yes, but the message beneath the surface was sharp. The figurine's face was tilted down, almost submissive, the way she probably wished I'd be. People think cruelty in families comes through shouting matches, slam doors, or harsh words. But no, sometimes it's through gifts. Through kindness, so calculated, it leaves you defenseless. I put the figurine on a shelf in my living room facing the wall. I couldn't throw it away, but I couldn't look at it either. Later that evening, my friend Gloria came over for tea and noticed it. "That's adorable," she said. I just smiled and replied, "Yes, it's thoughtful." We both knew that word had layers. Over the next few weeks, the thoughtful gifts continued. A jar of anti-aging cream. "I know you're too modest to treat yourself." A book titled How to Declutter Your Life. "You mentioned your house felt full lately. A subscription to an online yoga class. It might help your knee." Each parcel came with a note that dripped with politeness and pity. It's a strange feeling when someone decides to manage your life as if it's their project. I started wondering if she even realized what she was doing, or if manipulation had just become her way of showing affection. There's a sociological concept called benevolent hostility. It's when people use kindness to assert superiority, like when someone insists on helping you with something you're perfectly capable of doing yourself because it reminds them that you need them. That's what these gifts were, trophies of control wrapped in satin ribbons. People still debate whether this form of dominance is conscious or cultural. I think in her case it was both. My son, of course, didn't see it. "She's just trying to be nice, Mom," he said during one of our Sunday calls. You always think people have hidden motives. I didn't argue. It's impossible to convince someone in love that they're living inside someone else's design. "You're right," I told him. "She's kind." He relaxed after that, not realizing that sometimes surrender is the only way to win small battles. I decided to send her something in return, a framed photo of my son at age 8, covered in mud, grinning ear to ear, holding a frog in his hand. The note I attached read, "He's always loved messy things." I knew she'd read between the lines. A week later, she texted, "So sweet, I'll find a place for it." I pictured it sitting in a drawer somewhere face down. That's fine. Not every gift is meant to be displayed. Some are meant to remind. Then came the incident with the scarf. It was early March, still cold enough to feel like winter was refusing to leave. She mailed me a designer scarf, cashmere soft as a secret. The tag was still attached. The note read, "You mentioned losing your old one. Consider this a replacement. Only I hadn't lost my scarf, it had gone missing during my last visit. My favorite one, handmade by my late husband." I read her note again, then looked at the scarf. Same shade of blue, slightly different pattern. I felt something twist inside me. Was it coincidence? Was it mockery? Or was it her way of saying, everything you lose, I can replace? It's strange how small objects can become battlegrounds. Scarves, photos, even a jar of cream, they carry meanings only two people understand. I could have confronted her, but I didn't. Instead, I wore it. Every Sunday at church, that scarf rested around my shoulders like armor. If she ever asked, I wanted to say, "Yes, it's perfect, just like you wanted." Gloria once told me, "You're letting her win by not saying anything." But I've lived long enough to know silence can be louder than confrontation. Families thrive on reactions. Withholding one is a quiet kind of revolution. Still, I won't lie, it got under my skin. At night, I'd lie awake thinking about her notes, her smile, the way she turned every gesture into a transaction. It reminded me of something I'd read about inheritance customs in old European families, how wives used gifts to secure emotional leverage over their mothers-in-law, symbolizing their new control over the household. In those days, they gave embroidered linens. Today, it's subscription boxes and skincare sets. Same ritual, just rebranded. Then one day, the biggest package yet, arrived a large, elegant box tied with a gold ribbon. Inside was a potted bonsai tree, perfectly trimmed. The note read, "Patience grows with time." That one broke me. I laughed, I cried, I even watered the thing. It sat by my window, reminding me daily of her lesson, be patient. But patience is not passivity, it's calculation with grace. I decided right then that if she was going to play the long game, so would I. When my son called that week, he mentioned how happy she was that we were getting along. I didn't correct him. "She's wonderful," I said. "Always knows what to send." He sounded relieved. Maybe that was enough for now. That night, I poured a glass of wine and sat beside the bonsai, trimming a small branch. There's a Japanese saying, "The tree that bends survives the storm." I repeated it softly, watching the tiny leaves fall into the soil. Maybe she thought she was teaching me patience, but what she didn't realize was that I'd already mastered endurance long before she ever joined our family. And in that quiet moment, I understood something chilling. She wasn't trying to destroy me. She was trying to erase me, slowly, politely, until I became a story she could tell her friends, my husband's mother. Oh, she's lovely but fragile. That's worse than hatred. It's rewriting someone into irrelevance. But as the old saying goes, every chess player eventually meets someone who studies their game longer than they've been playing it. And my turn was coming. My birthday arrived that spring, a date that had always been simple and quiet, more about homemade cakes and laughter than presents or spectacle. But this year, she insisted on hosting it at their house. "It'll be special," my son said. "She's been planning it for weeks." I should have felt flattered, but something about his tone, half eager, half apologetic, made my stomach tighten. You can always tell when a celebration is being used as an experiment. When I arrived, the house was full of people I barely knew, her friends, her coworkers, even a couple of neighbors I'd never met. I smiled, shook hands, and thanked them for coming, even though I could feel my own pulse thudding in my neck. There was music, laughter, clinking glasses. A big gold banner stretched across the dining room wall. Happy birthday, Queen. I stood there, staring at it, unsure if it was supposed to be affectionate or ironic. She floated through the crowd like a hostess from a lifestyle magazine, smiling perfectly, managing everyone's comfort but mine. "You're the star tonight," she said, guiding me toward the center of the room. I laughed politely, though I felt more like an exhibit than a guest of honor. Dinner was elaborate. 5 courses, all labeled with tiny handwritten cards, like a restaurant menu, but warmer. She'd clearly spent days preparing. I'll give her that. When she commits fully. Yet everything felt just slightly off, as if I were attending a version of my own birthday in someone else's dream. Even the cake was strange, 3 layers of pale frosting shaped like roses, the kind of extravagant thing I'd never have chosen. When it was time for the toast, she stood up with her glass, smiling at everyone. "I just want to say," she began, "that having my name in my life has taught me patience, humor, and most of all, how to handle unexpected situations gracefully." The crowd laughed. I froze. That line, that subtle emphasis on gracefully, was a direct callback to the night I fell. She'd turned my humiliation into a punchline for her party speech. My son laughed too, though awkwardly, probably hoping to diffuse the tension. I raised my glass, smiling as if I hadn't heard the sting beneath her words. People think strength is shouting back, but sometimes it's staying still while everyone else laughs. I looked straight at her and said, "Well, dear, some lessons take years to teach." The laughter faltered for half a second before the chatter resumed. I caught the flash in her eyes, surprise, maybe even admiration. After dessert, she handed me a large gift bag in front of everyone. "Open it," someone cheered. I pulled out tissue paper to reveal a brand new pair of orthopedic shoes. The label read, "For comfort and balance." I held them up, smiled faintly, and said, "Oh, how thoughtful. These will be perfect for gardening." The crowd laughed again, but my son's expression turned gray. He knew what she was doing, humiliating me under the guise of humor. There's a saying in family psychology, mockery disguised as concern is still control. People still debate whether humor softens cruelty or just polishes it. That night, it didn't soften a thing. It just sharpened it. When the guests finally left, she came over, wrapping her arms around me like nothing had happened. "Did you have fun?" she asked. "You look beautiful tonight." I smiled and said, "It was unforgettable." And it truly was. Later, I went to the bathroom to collect myself and saw my reflection in the mirror, smiling face eyes, slightly wet lipstick, fading. I laughed quietly. There it was, again, laughter. The same sound she used to break me. But this time it came from me, not mockery, resilience. As I drove home that night, I thought about how families perform kindness for audiences. Birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, they're all small stages where everyone plays their assigned roles. The daughter-in-law must shine, the mother must smile, the husband must keep peace. What no one sees is the quiet war of glances and gestures beneath the applause. A week later, a thank you card arrived from her. Inside was a printed photo from the party, me mid-laugh surrounded by her friends. She wrote, "You looked so happy. Let's do it again next year." I tucked the card into a drawer with the others. Gifts, notes, photos, each one another layer of our carefully constructed illusion. That weekend at church, I overheard a group of women discussing family tensions. One said her daughter-in-law never called her mom. Another said hers had blocked her on social media. I smiled bitterly, realizing we were all soldiers in the same invisible army, fighting for relevance in homes we built, but no longer belonged to. Sociologists say modern families are shifting from hierarchical to transactional. Respect isn't inherited, it's negotiated daily. Maybe that's why her laughter felt like a business deal. It wasn't about emotion, it was about territory. I decided then that I wouldn't let her define me as the fragile old woman who trips and needs comfort shoes. I started walking every morning, slow but steady. I even joined a Tai Chi group in the park. The instructor said balance isn't just physical, it's emotional. I smiled, thinking of her gift and how I was learning to use it against her without even returning a word. Sometimes I imagine her telling someone about me, "She's strong for her age." That phrase "for her age" is the modern version of condescension wrapped in sugar. But that's fine. Let her think she's the one in control. I've been a mother longer than she's been a wife, and that's not a hierarchy, it's experience. The night of the birthday, when I closed my eyes, I saw her smirking, glass raised, talking about Grace. It should have hurt. Instead, I felt calm, because I realized something powerful: she could only humiliate me publicly if I let her win privately. And so the next time she laughed, I planned to laugh louder. Not mockingly, but with full, unapologetic joy, the kind that says, "You don't own this sound anymore." 2 weeks after that birthday, while the memory of those orthopedic shoes was still fresh in my mind, something else arrived this time. Not wrapped in ribbons or gold paper, but in whispers. I had gone to visit my sister, and as we sat on her porch drinking tea, she leaned in and said, "I heard your name came up in a conversation at the bank." I looked at her, half amused, half wary. "At the bank?" I asked. "What did I do, rob the place?" She smiled, but her eyes were cautious. "Not quite. Someone overheard your daughter-in-law asking about transferring ownership of a joint account. Apparently your son's name was mentioned. So was yours." I laughed, though my stomach tightened. "There must be a mistake," I said. But my sister shrugged. "Maybe. But people talk." And that was enough to make the gears in my head start turning. I had never given my daughter-in-law access to anything financial. Why would I? Still, she was clever, and she knew how to make my son believe things were for my comfort. I spent that night going through my papers, wills, and documents. Everything looked fine. But that word apparently echoed like a slow drip in a quiet house. You'd be surprised how many family feuds start with the word inheritance. Historians say the earliest recorded family lawsuits were about land rights, parents, children, and spouses fighting over what was left behind. Nothing much has changed. It's just dressed in bank accounts and trust funds now. People still debate whether it's greed or fear that drives these disputes. I think it's both. Fear of scarcity, fear of insignificance. The following week, my son called cheerful as always. "Mom, we're thinking of helping you organize your finances a bit. You've got so many accounts and papers, it might be easier if we simplify things." His voice was too casual, too rehearsed. "We?" I asked. "You and her." There was a pause. "Well, she's good with numbers," he said. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "I'm sure she is." That conversation stuck with me like a thorn. It wasn't that I distrusted him, it was that I no longer trusted the silence between his words. He'd never have said that on his own. I pictured her standing nearby, whispering suggestions while he spoke. That's the thing about manipulation. It doesn't always sound like lies. Sometimes it sounds like advice. 2 days later, she sent me a text. "Hey, just wondering if you've had time to think about your estate plan. We can help with that if you'd like." A smiley face, of course. I didn't respond. Instead, I poured myself a drink and looked around my house. The furniture, I'd chosen the photographs, I'd framed the walls that had absorbed decades of laughter, anger, and quiet. It's strange how possessions begin to look temporary once you sense someone else already sees them as theirs. I've always believed that inheritance should be about memory, not money. My mother used to say, "We don't leave behind what we owned, we leave behind what we taught." But the modern world doesn't run on sentiment, it runs on signatures. I began wondering how much of my legacy would survive her efficiency. The next time I visited, I tested the waters. We were sitting in her living room, my son watching TV, her scrolling through her phone. "You know," I said lightly, "I've been thinking of leaving everything to charity. Simplifies things." She looked up, her face calm, but her eyes flickering for a split second. "That's very generous," she said. "I'm sure they'd appreciate it." The tone was neutral, but her jaw tightened. My son shifted in his seat, pretending not to hear. That told me everything I needed to know. A few days later, she started calling me more often. "Just checking in," she'd say. "How's your knee?" Or, "We should have lunch soon." The sudden warmth was disorienting, like being hugged by a stranger. I played along, polite but distant. Sometimes the best revenge is confusion. I began keeping a small notebook, a habit I hadn't had in years. Each night, I'd write down details, what she said, what she did, what I felt. Not out of paranoia, but precision. Families like ours don't implode in chaos, they dissolve through patterns. And I wanted to see the pattern clearly. There's a legal term I stumbled upon once: undue influence. It means using emotional manipulation to control someone's decisions, often about inheritance. It's hard to prove because it lives in the shadows between kindness and control. Reading about it gave me an eerie comfort. At least I knew I wasn't imagining things. One afternoon, I visited their house unannounced, a small experiment. She opened the door surprised but smiling. "You should have told us you were coming," she said, voice cheerful but tense. I walked in anyway, scanning the room. Everything looked perfect as always, but I noticed something new: a framed photo of me and my son from years ago, our old fishing trip. It was placed on the mantel, carefully visible. A gesture, maybe, or a signal. "I love this picture," she said. "It's so authentic." That word made my skin prickle. Authentic, as if everything else between us was a performance. We sat down for tea, the conversation polite, even pleasant. She asked about my health, my garden, my friends. Then casually she said, "You know, it's so smart to get things in order early. That way there are no surprises later." She said it softly, like advice from a doctor. I smiled and replied, "You're right. Surprises are exhausting at my age." Her eyes met mine, and for a brief moment there was no mask, just quiet acknowledgement that we both knew the game. That evening, I wrote in my notebook, "She wants control. I want peace. Neither of us will get both." Still, a part of me pitied her. It takes a strange kind of hunger to want to own everything: objects, affection, legacy. I started to wonder where she learned it. From her own family, from watching others win through charm. People still debate whether greed is inherited or taught. Maybe it's both a blend of blood and example. That night, as I closed my notebook, I thought of a truth no one likes to say out loud. Families don't always fight over what's valuable, they fight over what's left. And in my case, what was left wasn't money or property. It was me. If family gatherings are meant to bring people together, then the group chat was designed to tear us apart one emoji at a time. It started innocently enough. My son created it to keep everyone updated on schedules, dinners, and small family plans. There were 6 of us in it: my son, my daughter-in-law, her parents, her sister, and me. A digital dining table, he called it. Except at this table, I always felt like I was speaking into a void. Whenever I said something, shared an old photo, sent a recipe, wished someone good morning, my messages floated like balloons that never popped, just drifted into silence. Meanwhile, her posts were met with floods of hearts and laughing faces. "You're so funny. You're the best." I told myself it didn't matter. But after weeks of that, you start to feel the imbalance, like a guest clapping alone at the end of a play. Once I sent a simple picture of my garden, proud of the new tulips I'd planted. She replied with, "Oh, how cute, it's so vintage." Vintage. Not beautiful, not lovely vintage, like something outdated, but amusing. Everyone reacted with the laughing emoji. I smiled at my screen, pretending it didn't sting. That's the thing about digital cruelty, it's deniable. You can't accuse someone of malice when all they did was react to something. Family psychologists call it performative bonding, when people use group dynamics to isolate one person without open hostility. I'd read about it before, but now I was living it in pixels. People still debate whether online communication strengthens families or just digitizes the same old hierarchies. I can tell you firsthand, it doesn't strengthen anything. It just hides the sharpness better. After that, I stopped posting. I became what they call a reader, silent, but always watching. I saw the jokes that tiptoed around me, the subtle digs disguised as banter. My son would occasionally send a heart to my old messages, as if sprinkling crumbs of loyalty. I appreciated it, but crumbs don't make a meal. Then came the day of the infamous meme. My daughter-in-law posted a cartoon of an older woman standing with her hands on her hips, saying, "I'm not nosy, I'm just concerned." Beneath it, she added, "Some people take this way too seriously." Her sister responded, "Haha, so true." And her mother wrote, "Reminds me of someone I know." I stared at it for a long moment before typing, "I like that cartoon, reminds me of myself 10 years ago." She reacted with a heart. That was her specialty, disguising daggers as hugs. I thought about leaving the chat altogether. But leaving felt like surrender, and I wasn't ready to vanish from my own family's digital life. Instead, I stayed quiet. Sometimes, silence isn't withdrawal, it's observation. A few days later, she sent a message saying she'd made my favorite stew in honor of Mom. I noticed she didn't tag me, didn't use my name, just Mom. For the others, that meant her mother. For me, it meant invisibility. Still, everyone reacted with hearts and applause emojis. I stared at the screen and whispered, "Noted." That night, I deleted all my old messages, not out of anger, out of clarity. When you erase your words from a space that refuses to hear them, you take back a small piece of control. I remember reading once that in some cultures, family messages are considered sacred, an extension of the home. In ours, they had become performance art. The next morning, she sent a picture of herself holding her mother's hand at brunch. "Nothing like a mother's love," she wrote. My son commented with a heart. I didn't. Instead, I watered my bonsai tree and whispered, "Amen." Days turned into weeks, and I began to find humor in the absurdity of it all. One morning, she posted a quote, "Strong women don't compete, they empower each other." I almost laughed out loud. The irony was delicious. I wanted to reply, "Then empower yourself to stop mocking me online," but I didn't. My restraint had become my power. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. Her mother posted a photo of an old house, aged bricks, peeling paint, the caption, "Where it all began." Someone asked whose house it was, and she replied, "Ours, before life got complicated." The comment section went quiet for a while. Then my daughter-in-law responded, "Haha, don't start, Mom." The tone was playful, but there was tension underneath. You could feel it, like static before lightning. It was the first time I sensed cracks forming in her own world. She replied again, "We'll visit soon. Promise." I could tell that promise wasn't mutual, and suddenly I saw something her fear, the fear of being judged by her own mother the same way she judged me. Maybe that's what drives some people to control others. They're terrified of being controlled themselves. After that post, the group chat slowed down. Fewer jokes, fewer memes. My son started texting me privately more often. Small things. "How are you feeling? Need anything from the store?" I always said no, but the gestures mattered. The digital fog began to clear. That night, I decided to re-enter the battlefield subtly. I posted an old photo of me holding my son as a baby, captioned, "Time flies, but love stays." It was simple, honest, and unprovocative. Within minutes, my son reacted with a heart. Her mother commented, "Beautiful memory." And my daughter-in-law, she left it unseen, a small silence louder than any word. But here's the funny thing about family politics. When you stop reacting, people don't know where to aim. Silence confuses aggressors. I learned that from experience and from documentaries about animal hierarchies, believe it or not. They say that in wolf packs, the alpha doesn't bark the loudest. It's the one who doesn't need to. I smiled that night, thinking, let her have her memes. I'll keep my legacy. Sometimes I wonder if future generations will scroll through our family chats the way we used to flip through photo albums. If they do, I hope they notice how one woman held her ground quietly, emoji by emoji, message by message, until she turned from a target into a mystery. It was around early summer when an old friend from my hometown, Anita, called out of the blue. "I was in your neighborhood," she said, and thought I'd stop by. I hadn't seen her in years. She had moved away long before my son got married. When she arrived carrying her trademark bouquet of mismatched flowers and that familiar scent of lilac and dust, it felt like opening a window in a stale room. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one that had seen too many quiet meals alone. And after a few pleasantries, she said, "You won't believe this, but my daughter reminds me so much of your daughter-in-law." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh, how so?" Anita laughed softly, though there was no joy in it. "She's polished, clever, always knows how to say the right thing, but never what she really feels. You know the type." "I did. We all do," she went on. "She's been giving me gifts lately, like she's trying to buy my silence. Expensive scarves, perfume I don't like, even offered to handle my bills. It's kind, but it feels wrong." I felt a chill crawl up my arms. "You said she reminds you of my daughter-in-law," I asked. Anita nodded. "Yes, always perfect, always smiling, but there's something behind it, something cold." That conversation lingered long after she left. I sat by the window that evening staring at the fading light and wondered how many mothers out there were quietly losing their place in their own families while smiling through it. Maybe we were part of a hidden sisterhood, unacknowledged casualties of modern courtesy. People still debate whether today's families are more emotionally intelligent or just better at pretending. I think we've learned to replace honesty with politeness, and that's not progress. It's camouflage. A week later, Anita called again, her voice trembling. "You'll never guess what I found out," she said. "My daughter's been talking to her therapist about how I make her feel small. Can you believe that, me? The woman who paid for her college helped her raise her kids? I didn't know what to say." She sighed and added, "And here's the strangest part. Her therapist's last name is the same as your daughter-in-law's." I froze. "Wait, what?" I asked. "You mean—" She interrupted. "Yes, they're cousins." My mind spun. "Are you sure? Positive?" she said. Apparently, her mother used to talk about it all the time back in the day, how proud she was of both girls. I never connected the dots. That revelation cracked something open inside me. Suddenly, the little coincidences made sense. The same phrasing, the same carefully measured tone, the same way of disguising criticism as compassion. It wasn't just personality. It was family training. They came from a lineage of control where emotional manipulation was an heirloom passed down like fine china. I felt both anger and fascination. Families carry strange rituals, and theirs seemed to be the art of dominance masked as kindness. Later that night, I went online and searched for her mother's name, just curiosity at first. A few clicks later, I found an old article about a local dispute her mother had once been sued by her own sister over an inheritance disagreement. It was settled quietly, but the details were telling. The sister accused her of withholding documents and exerting undue influence. That phrase again. The same one I had written in my notebook weeks ago. I sat there staring at the screen feeling an eerie calm. It wasn't satisfaction exactly, it was recognition. History was repeating itself, just dressed in modern manners. I thought of something a sociologist once said in an interview: families don't evolve, they recycle. I was now living proof. The next time I saw my daughter-in-law, it was at a family barbecue. She greeted me with her usual glowing smile, kissed my cheek, and said, "You look radiant," I replied. "Must be the sunlight. It exposes everything." For a second, her smile faltered. It was barely noticeable, but I caught it. She quickly recovered, laughing. "You always have the best comebacks, only when I mean them," I said. Anita's revelation had changed something in me. I stopped seeing my daughter-in-law as the villain in my story. She was just another player in a long-inherited pattern, one she probably didn't even fully understand. That realization didn't soften me, but it clarified my strategy. The next time she tried to patronize me, I wouldn't resist or argue. I would study, observe, let her think she was winning while I quietly mapped the entire board. During dinner, she told a story about her mother, the strongest woman she's ever known. I smiled. "You must take after her," I said, watching her carefully. "I try," she replied proudly. I can tell I said my tone gentle but deliberate. She glanced at me, uncertain whether it was praise or accusation. It was both. After everyone went home, I helped clean the kitchen. My son offered to take the trash out, leaving us alone. She leaned on the counter, sighing dramatically. "You know, she said I've been trying hard to make things right between us." I wiped a plate slowly and replied, "So have I. I just go about it differently." She frowned. "What do you mean?" I met her gaze and said softly, "I prefer results that last." She didn't respond. Instead, she smiled tightly and changed the subject. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "Her control isn't personal, it's generational." But she's about to learn that patterns can be broken. Sometimes the universe gives you allies you didn't expect. Anita and I started meeting every week, sharing stories, comparing notes. It became our ritual, our little rebellion against polite cruelty. She once said, "You can't fight subtlety with rage. You have to fight it with patience." I laughed, thinking of the bonsai by my window. Funny, I said someone once sent me a tree to teach me that lesson. As weeks went by, I began to notice the cracks in my daughter-in-law's composure. She'd send shorter texts, cancel plans last minute, even forget to include me in group chats occasionally. Mistakes she'd never have made before. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was movement, like a ripple in still water. And deep down, I knew something was coming, something that would finally show her what it feels like when control slips from your hands. And I had a feeling her mother would have something to do with it. I don't know what compelled me to start writing that letter. Maybe exhaustion, maybe pride, but one evening, after another, polite phone call that ended with her usual, "Take care of yourself, okay?" I sat down and began pouring everything onto paper. It wasn't meant for anyone to read, at least not at first. It started as a way to speak freely without the tight smile and shallow breath that came with every conversation in that house. The words came fast, sharper than I expected. "You laugh like kindness is a performance," I wrote. And maybe it is. Maybe that's why your affection feels like theater, beautiful, convincing, but hollow when the curtain falls. I filled 3 pages before stopping. There was anger, yes, but also something like sorrow and ache for what could have been. I told her how I used to imagine we'd cook together, trade recipes, talk about the man we both loved from different angles. Instead, we'd built a cold alliance around him like 2 diplomats maintaining peace for the sake of a shared border. I wrote about the night I felt the birthday toast, the gifts, even the scarf. Every line was a wound reopened, but as the ink dried, I realized I wasn't writing to her anymore. I was writing to myself, the version of me that had been silenced by politeness. When I finished, I folded the letter and sealed it in an envelope, but I didn't send it. It sat on my dresser like a confession I wasn't ready to release. People still debate whether closure comes from confrontation or understanding. I think it comes from restraint, the decision not to hand your power to the person who caused the pain. A few days later, I noticed my son had stopped calling as often. His texts became shorter, vaguer. "Busy week," he'd say. "We'll talk soon." It wasn't hard to guess why. She had probably sensed my growing distance and begun tightening her circle, pulling him closer. That's the thing about controlling people. They sense independence, the way sharks sense blood. I told myself to stay calm, to wait. I'd learned that patience was my strongest weapon. Then came the weekend barbecue they didn't invite me to, but forgot I'd still see on social media. There she was, smiling in her floral dress, holding my grandson's hand, surrounded by laughter. The caption read, "Family time is sacred." I stared at the photo until the screen blurred. Sacred, a word so misused it felt like a parody now. I closed the app, walked into the garden, and watered the bonsai. "Family time," I murmured, must have new definitions. That night, I reopened the letter and read it again. Instead of bitterness, I felt clarity. I decided to rewrite it, not as an attack, but as a record. I wanted my words to exist, even if she never saw them. So I bought a small notebook and started from the beginning, turning my pain into documentation. The first rule of surviving polite cruelty, I wrote, is to collect evidence, not rage. Each page became a map of our silent war dates, phrases, small details that proved I wasn't imagining things. It wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. One evening, as I sat writing, I heard the phone buzz. It was my son. His voice sounded tired. "Mom, is everything okay between you and her?" I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "Everything's fine," I said. "Why do you ask?" He hesitated. "She feels like you're distant." I almost laughed. Distant. That's her specialty. There was silence on the other end. "She's just trying," he said. "We both are." I could hear the strain in his tone, the way guilt sits heavy when love pulls in 2 directions. I softened my voice. "I know you are, sweetheart, and I love you for it." After that call, I realized something crucial. She was losing control, not because I fought harder, but because I stopped feeding her narrative. Without my reactions, she had no drama to manage, no chaos to manipulate. I'd become boring, and in her world, boredom was defeat. A week later, she texted, "Miss, seeing you around. We should have dinner soon." I waited a full day before replying, "That would be nice. Let me check my schedule." I didn't have a schedule, but the illusion of one was enough. For the first time, she was the one waiting. Around that time, I started noticing changes in my son. He seemed quieter, less eager to defend her. When I asked how things were, he'd sigh and say, "She's stressed, you know how she gets." It was the first crack in his blind loyalty. I didn't press, I just listened. People reveal more when you stop demanding answers. That same week, Anita told me she'd bumped into my daughter-in-law's mother at a cafe. "Cold woman," she said, dressed like she was attending her own coronation. But there was something odd. She kept complaining about her daughter, said she never visits anymore. I leaned forward. "Really?" Anita nodded. Apparently they had a fight. Something about boundaries and respect. My lips curved into a slow, involuntary smile. So the fortress had cracks after all. That night I wrote a final entry in my letter. Control is inherited, but so is collapse. The same roots that feed pride also feed downfall. I sealed it not with tape, but with peace. I didn't need to send it. Life would deliver the message for me. Still, a small part of me longed for justice, not vengeance, but symmetry. the kind that comes when the universe rearranges the pieces just right. I didn't know it yet, but that symmetry was on its way, rolling toward me, quietly, like a train in the dark, and it would arrive one ordinary afternoon with a knock at the door. It was a Friday afternoon, the kind where the air feels heavy but expectant, like the world is holding its breath. I was sitting by the window trimming my bonsai when the doorbell rang, 3 quick knocks, firm and impatient. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door only to find her standing there. Not my daughter-in-law, her mother. She was smaller than I expected, but there was something regal about her hair, pulled tight coat, pressed lipstick too red for the daylight. She didn't smile. "You must be surprised," she said, her tone clipped and precise, as if she were used to being listened to. I nodded slowly. "A little," I admitted. "Please, come in." She stepped past me without hesitation, her perfume filling the space like authority itself. She sat down at my kitchen table, the same chair her daughter had used during countless passive-aggressive teas, and crossed her legs. "I won't take much of your time," she began, eyes scanning the room like an inspector. I thought it was time we spoke. Woman to woman. I made coffee deliberately slow, letting her feel the pause. "All right," I said. "What about—" She looked at me, her smile thin as paper. "About my daughter," she said. "She's been struggling. Says you've been distant, that you've been cold toward her." I leaned against the counter, hands folded. "Has she?" I asked softly. "Yes," the woman continued. "She's very sensitive, you know. Always has been, takes things to heart." I nearly laughed at the irony. "I see," I said, sipping my coffee. "That must be difficult for both of you." She frowned slightly, as if unused to not being in control of the tone. "She admires you," she said finally, though she won't admit it. "You remind her of me in some ways." I smiled faintly. "Then she must find that very confusing." The older woman tilted her head. "Excuse me?" "Being reminded of something she tries so hard to surpass," I replied. There was a long, delicious silence. She placed her cup down. "You're clever," she said. "That much I can tell." I shrugged. "Only when I need to be." She sighed. "I came here because she's unhappy. I thought perhaps you could be more accommodating. She's under pressure, you understand, career, family, appearances." I nodded slowly. "Ah, yes," I said, "appearances. You seem to value those highly." Her eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. "It means I've learned that control wears many costumes. Sometimes it looks like generosity, sometimes concern, sometimes a surprise visit." Her face hardened, but she said nothing. There it was again, the generational echo Anita had warned me about. The mother who once used power to shape her daughter, now watching that same pattern slip away. After a long pause, she said quietly, "You know she's not as strong as she looks." I smiled almost kindly. "Few people are." Her voice softened. "She gets that from me. We both learned early that the world only respects composure." I nodded. "Yes, but composure without empathy is just cruelty in better clothing." Something shifted in her, then a flicker of discomfort, maybe shame, though. She masked it well. "You think you've figured us out?" she said. "Oh, no," I replied. "You've already figured yourselves out. I'm just watching the rerun." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She stood up abruptly, smoothing her coat. Well, she said this was enlightening. I walked her to the door. As she stepped out, she turned back, her expression unreadable. "You've made her feel small," she said. I held her gaze. "No," I replied. "She's just standing next to someone who refuses to shrink anymore." When the door closed, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from adrenaline. The encounter felt like the final scene in a play I hadn't agreed to perform in. I looked at the bonsai by the window. One of its tiny branches had snapped during the trimming, but the rest stood firm. I smiled. "Resilient little thing," I whispered. An hour later, my phone rang. It was my son. "Mom," he said quickly, "did my mother-in-law come by?" I hesitated, then answered truthfully. "She did." He groaned softly. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know she was going to do that." "Don't apologize," I said. "She was polite." "That's what worries me," he replied. "When she's polite, something's brewing." Apparently his wife and her mother had argued the night before about what I asked. He hesitated. "Her mother said she's too controlling, that she's turning into her." I almost laughed. "And how did she take that?" "Not well," he said. "She threw her phone." Left the house for a few hours. I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. Mom, I don't know what's happening anymore. Everyone's walking on eggshells. I wanted to tell him that this was the natural collapse of an empire built on appearances, that control once questioned eats itself alive. But instead, I said softly, "Let her breathe, son." Sometimes losing control is the only way people learn what peace feels like. That night, I sat down and wrote the final line in my notebook. Her mother came looking for reconciliation, but brought confession instead. People still debate whether fate is poetic or cruel. I think it's both. Because the same house that once echoed with her laughter would soon echo with silence, and this time, not mine. The next few days after her mother's visit felt oddly still, like the quiet that settles after a storm has passed, but before people realize what's been destroyed. My phone was silent, no calls, no texts, not even the usual polite check-in from my daughter-in-law. For the first time in months, my evenings stretched wide and unoccupied. I cooked small meals, took longer walks, let the radio hum softly in the background. It wasn't peace, exactly, it was recovery. There's a difference. Peace feels earned. Recovery just feels overdue. On the fourth day, my son finally called. His voice was tired, but lighter. Somehow, the kind of tone people use when they've stopped pretending everything is fine. Mom, he said, things have been strange here. I stayed quiet, letting him find the words. Her mom's staying with us for a few days. She just showed up. I bit back a smile, unannounced. Exactly, he sighed. I think she came to help, but they've been arguing nonstop. It's like she knows exactly which buttons to push. I wanted to ask for details, but he kept talking. She told her she's become manipulative, that she's too focused on appearances. And she said I'm too soft for letting it happen. His voice cracked slightly. Mom, it's chaos. I closed my eyes and pictured that house, the same one where I'd once fallen, where laughter used to sting. Now I imagined raised voices echoing off those polished floors. It was poetic, really, the symmetry of it all. I'm sorry, honey, I said gently. But maybe this is something they need to work through, alone. Later that night, curiosity got the better of me. I opened social media, half expecting to see the usual curated smiles. But her page was different. Posts deleted, captions edited. No new photos, just a quote posted the day before. Sometimes the people who taught you strength are the ones you must learn to stand against. I stared at it for a long time. Maybe she was trying to tell the world something, or herself. A week passed before she called me. Her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Hi, she said. I hope I'm not bothering you. I smiled into the receiver. Not at all. How are you? There was a pause. It's been intense, she admitted. Mom and I aren't really talking right now. She's gone back home. Her tone was stripped of its usual control. She sounded human, almost fragile. I'm sorry you had to see that side of her, she said softly. She can be overbearing. I let the silence linger. Then I said, we all can be when we're scared. That sentence seemed to disarm her. You're kinder than I deserve, she murmured. No, I said. I'm just older than you think, she laughed weakly. You always have a way of saying things that make me think too much. Maybe that's my only revenge, I said, half joking. For once, she laughed genuinely, not sharp, not mocking. Just tired. I think I owe you an apology, she whispered. I didn't rush to fill the air. You don't owe me anything, I said finally. Life already takes its share from all of us. After that, things didn't transform overnight. Life isn't that generous. But something had shifted. The next time I visited the house felt different. The air wasn't thick anymore. She greeted me with a genuine smile, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything. My son seemed more relaxed, the tension around his shoulders gone. We ate dinner together, and for once there were no corrections, no subtle jabs, just conversation. She even asked about my bonsai, saying she'd love to learn how to prune one. It's easy, I said. You just have to know when to cut and when to let grow. She nodded, thoughtful. After dinner, she handed me a small box. Just a little something, she said. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a pendant, a tiny silver leaf. It reminded me of you, she said quietly. Still green no matter the season. It wasn't grand or dramatic, but it was honest. For the first time, I believed her. On the drive home, I thought about everything that had happened. The laughter, the silence, the gifts, the letters never sent the visit that changed everything. Families are strange organisms. They mutate under pressure, finding new shapes when old ones collapse. People still debate whether forgiveness is strength or surrender. I think it's neither. It's evolution. When I got home, I placed the pendant beside the bonsai and whispered, "You see growth." Then I laughed softly, the kind of laugh that once broke me but now belonged to me again. The following morning, I wrote one last entry in my notebook. She laughed when I fell, but when her own mother came knocking, she learned what it felt like to be the one on the floor. And maybe that's how families balance themselves, not through revenge, but through reflection. I closed the book, placed it in my drawer, and brewed myself a cup of coffee. Outside, the garden shimmered in the early light, each petal glistening as if nothing bad had ever happened. And maybe, in that moment, nothing had. To all of you listening tonight, thank you for walking this path with me. Families are complicated, but stories like this remind us that even the deepest wounds can grow something beautiful if we give them time. Good night, my dear subscribers. Take care of yourselves, take care of your roots, and remember, every storm eventually waters the garden. Before I turn off the lights and let this story rest, I want to leave you with something quieter than an ending, something closer to truth. Families, for all their noise and chaos, don't break in explosions. They dissolve in whispers, in polite smiles, in the long pauses between, "How are you?" and "I'm fine." For a long time, I thought strength meant silence, that if I could just endure without complaint, love would eventually recognize itself. But love doesn't always come back. Sometimes it just changes form. When I look back now, I don't see villains and victims. I see mirrors. My daughter-in-law mirrored the younger version of me, the one who believed control was protection, that perfection could keep the world from hurting you. And I mirrored her mother, the woman who learned too late that control can't be inherited. It can only be repeated until someone chooses to stop. Maybe that's why the day she showed up at my door, it didn't feel like confrontation. It felt like history arriving for correction. If you've ever been in a family where laughter cuts deeper than silence, I hope this story reminds you that dignity isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to stay kind when it would be easier to be cruel. The ability to stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. The wisdom to let time do what anger never can teach. That's what the bonsai taught me. In the end, pruning isn't destruction. It's creation in disguise. You cut away the excess, not to wound, but to help something grow. Maybe that's what I did, not just with her, but with myself. I stopped watering resentment and started shaping resilience. And though she never saw the letter I wrote, I think she received it in another way, in the silence, in the boundaries in the mirror her mother unknowingly held up. So, if you're listening to this tonight, maybe in your car or under your blanket with the lights dimmed, know this, family. Stories don't end with forgiveness or revenge. They end when the need to be right gives way to the need to be free. Thank you for being here with me tonight, for every comment, every listen, every quiet heartbeat that stayed through the hard parts. Until next time, take a deep breath. Forgive what you can release, what you can't, and rest. Good night.